Thank you very much, everybody, for having me, and thank you very much for turning up today. So today we're going to talk about finding common threads, because with many conference presentations, you need to have a slightly funny little title, and that's what I went for. But what I'm going to try and do is describe a little bit of work we've been doing about describing and predicting linkages between impact case studies in general, and we've had a number of speakers talk about impact case studies today, and funded research. So, what we're going to talk about in a very high level is what's an impact case study and why should we care about it? What's Researchfish? So we've heard it mentioned a couple of times, that not everyone's going to be familiar with that, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that is. A little bit about the ref as a particular example of something that uses impact case studies. And helpfully, the people from Dundee have already given a good description of the ref earlier today, so that's super helpful. Then I'm going to explain some of the methodologies we've been applying in terms of describing linked data, so how we can connect things up into impact case studies, and a bit of work that's still in process, which is around predicting when a particular project might be involved in an impact case study. Just a very quick bit about the results, and then the next steps. So we're just going to cover these high-level topics. I'm not going to go in detail through any models, but if you want to talk about that more, I'm around and available. So impact case studies. So in terms of case studies are fairly common across many different disciplines. There's a lot of things that we know about case studies. There's a lot of disciplines that work in it, and they're used to generate a lot of good information about complex topics. Impact case studies are just case studies that are based around impact in general. And so explaining here, you can see this really nice quote from the University of Bath. They have it up on their impact toolkit. They explain why the research was necessary, the journey the research has taken, the difference your research has made. They cover the what, the where, the when, the who, and the how. So impact case studies are produced in order to describe these things. And impact case studies are important in many different situations. So the big one and the big driver and the focus here of the particular example is the ref. And so we've heard about some of the economic requirements around that, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But they're looking to try and understand the influence in economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment, quality of life. All of these things impact beyond academia. And what we see is that impact is increasingly important, and this whole track is based around impact. And it's used in multiple different processes. It could be grant applications that are looking to understand more about impact in the future, program evaluations or departmental evaluations, different assessment exercises, of which the ref is one, communications to the general public and stakeholders more general. So there's a lot of call to be able to produce impact case studies and use them as supporting evidence. That's just very quickly about impact case studies. I'm not very good with this clicker, unfortunately. Then for those of you who don't know Researchfish, pardon me, Researchfish is a web-based platform used primarily by funders to help understand the outputs, outcomes, and impacts of their funded research. So it's a platform there. It was part of Interfolio, and now Interfolio is part of Elsevier, and so we're another product that works a little bit like Pure in terms of collecting things, focused primarily on funders. It started in the UK with the Medical Research Council. It's been running since about 2008 in its first iteration. And it currently covers, and it's a bit challenging because exchange rates are fluctuating quite a bit at the minute, but about $80 billion worth of funded research. So it's got a lot of research in there, and it's got a lot of information on those outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And the reason it was set up was that it wanted to, well, the MRC at the time wanted to go beyond bibliometrics, beyond some of the traditional measures that we focus on academic impact, and look as part of this sort of early impact agenda to help understand societal and economic impact of research. And just in terms of what it is formally, it's a repeated survey measure So it's something that is conducted during and for a number of years after the life of a grant. So it's a report that people are asked to fill out, the researchers themselves are asked to fill out. There's lots of data pulled from different places, but it's asked for multiple times over an extended time period. So there's lots of data. And then in terms of sort of the going beyond bibliometrics, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that are contained within Researchfish, Researchfish has sort of strong operationalizations of each of these high-level outcome types, but really they're outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And so you can see publications and patents, sort of IP, the very common things that are easy to describe, but it also includes particular definitions of influence on policy, on engagement activities with non-academic audiences, and some of these other pieces here that are sort of further downstream in the research, producing, it could be data sets, it could be software, it could be spin-outs, could be further funding. So all of these different things are collected in Researchfish. And whilst publications are the most common single output type, more than half of the information in Researchfish on the comment section are these other output types that we think are possibly more tightly related to impact. So these are beyond publications. So there's quite a lot of information there. And in Researchfish as a whole, currently, we have a little over 4 million outcomes reported. So that's a very rich data set containing lots of information. And so there are about 180 different organizations who are using it to try and understand the impact of their funded research. And so funders use it for questions like, okay, we've set up this program that's designed to accelerate translational research. When they evaluate it at the end, can we see any evidence that this is the case? If we would like to try and have more of this type of an impact, what do we see at the end of it? Or even just what came out of it? So there's a lot of more quantitative-based analysis that funders use. But we've got a lot of information, and so the question that we were interested in is, could the data in Researchfish be used to help create these impact case studies? So in different scenarios across all of those use cases, and in particular in the UK, the RAF. And so the RAF is an expert review. We had a whole bunch of information about the RAF slightly earlier, and I think many people here were there for that. And so the RAF requires a large number of impact case studies to be generated. And they are a large and increasingly large proportion of the assessment that's done as part of the RAF. And there are some very large financial figures that go along with that. So you can see here that in the 2014 RAF, which was the one before the most recent one, the RAF allocated about £10.2 billion worth of public funding. So it's impact case studies, and there are some very real consequences that go along with this, and so people take it very, very seriously. And in 2014, the estimated cost of producing those impact case studies to the sector was over £50 million. So there's a lot of money spent on it, there's a lot of effort put into it. There's even more effort that's gone into the 2021 set, although it's a little bit early for that. The 2021 set includes several thousand impact case studies. And you can see here it covers a broad range of disciplines. So in RAF speak, units of assessment. So there's a different number in them. So you can see not so many in classics, quite a lot in business management. So it's all disciplines. And then you can see here are the universities submitting more than 50 case studies into the RAF last time. There are some very complicated rules about who has to produce how many impact case studies, and we're not going to worry about that for today. An impact case study looks a little bit like this, which is probably quite small text, so probably not really legible, but goes on a little bit further. So there's a whole long-form narrative, and there are a number of references to the research over there, number 3. So you can see, in this case, from Edinburgh, there are lots of publications with DOIs, which is great. In order to create links between Researchfish and the RAF, we looked at those references, we extracted them out, and then we tried to link them to things that are already linked in Researchfish. So then we can try and understand a little bit more about the projects. Now, we were able to do this with the REF 2014 data. We're currently doing this with the REF 2021 data. And it's a bit challenging with 14 because the REF covers a very extended time span and it doesn't quite correspond with Researchfish. But we've got the preliminary results here. Across all the different impact case studies, we had different levels of matching. So the light blue ones are what we could match to. So not a huge amount in the humanities side of things on the far right, but a reasonable amount in the medical on the left. And that sort of corresponds a little bit with the coverage over those time periods. But we use this to try and predict which awards would be linked. And so what we found was, and perhaps this is fairly intuitive, that awards that were included in research impact case studies tended to be longer, had more money associated with them, produced more journal articles, had policy influence more quickly than other types of awards. So it's not just having policy influence, but the speed, more collaborative, and had generated further funding. So these ultimately were the pieces that we looked at as part of our model. We have several different models, but we're not going to go into them in any detail today. But we generated through a series of them to see how good we could be at guessing, picking, selecting which things would be included. And what we found with a current final model, although it's an evolving process, is that we were able to get statistically significant results, which is always good. And we were able to successfully predict a fairly large portion of the awards in general. So these are sort of the model predictions that we were able to get and the probabilities and choices. And so on the formal model side, anything that's green is where it was included in an impact case study. Anything that's blue is where it wasn't. And the axis on the bottom is the probability of being included. So we were pretty good. So if we have high precision and high recall and try and balance between the two, we were able to successfully predict about 30% of the cases that were ultimately made, which is pretty decent given the data that we've got. If we're willing to accept a little bit more to sift through, then we can get up to 50% without really sacrificing very much. And that's on the 2014 set. So the general approach seems to be working, and we're predicting in reasonably large numbers. We would like to understand why some of those greens off in the very low probability section. We think those are very old and where we don't necessarily have the best data. But what we are currently doing here is we're continuing this work on the 2021 dataset. So this is much more amenable to these kinds of approaches because it covers better with a Researchfish timeframe. So REF 2021 has research going from about 2000, so it's a much better coverage. We're continuing this modeling work, which we think will be a more powerful model in terms of predicting these things. And why would we do this? Well, what we think is if we can take this data set in Researchfish and we can produce a model that we think is likely to get to the sorts of things that experts who have reviewed a whole big set of data at their institutions have ultimately selected as being suitable for an impact case study and put those things together, we might be able to help with this initial sifting across the whole institutional data to be able to focus in on particular sorts of things that might be useful in the impact case study. So this isn't to produce a score. This isn't to replace this process of impact case studies or expert review, but this can really potentially accelerate this process, reduce some of those very high costs that are associated with institutions putting together these case studies, and ultimately make use of existing data. So in the last panel, last but one, we talked a little bit about the challenges of people trying to produce impact case studies more or less speculatively because it's a very high overhead. So again, this could streamline some of that academic commitment to these different systems in terms of reporting. So That is a super fast coverage without going into the specifics of the model.